Hi, TUL friends. My name is Bobbie Schae. Welcome to today's episode of TUL Uncut, the unscripted and unedited video interview series where we dig deep into real stories about real pain to bring you the redeeming hope of the gospel message. At TUL, we know that even the most broken things can be upcycled in the right hands. Today's guest is writer Amanda Whiting. She is a biological and adoptive mama of 7. She's a homeschooler. She lives on a farm, and today she shares some really great words about renewal. She's also the pastor of spiritual formation at Last City Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. Welcome, Amanda Whiting.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Awesome. Well, we're just going to jump right into our conversation and get started. In your Upcycled Minute, you talked about a time where you moved your family of 9 onto a farm, and you kind of experienced not only like a physical fall and winter season, but kind of a spiritual fall and winter season that was a little bit challenging. Can you explain that just a little bit and kind of elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah. When we were moving, we had just purchased our house on a farm. And in that fall season, it had been in the middle of actually a lot of other things. We were in the middle of wondering whether or not we'd be adopting our youngest daughter. Like a week after moving in, my grandpa passed away. And so it was just this season of a lot of waiting, a lot of unknown. And so while there was all this goodness of coming to the house, it had happened later than we expected. And so we arrived when leaves were falling and snow was about to come. And it just felt like we couldn't enjoy the outdoors, and things were kind of getting ready to settle and be cold and quiet for a while. And it felt very similar on the inside. You know, it felt, will I ever adopt this little girl? How do I grieve grandpa in the midst of trying to still be the mom that I need to be and enjoy this new home and things like that? And yeah, so it felt a little bit like the letting go of leaves. I use the metaphor of leaves because it felt like, leaves falling from the tree, and all of a sudden there's this bareness and kind of like a visual emptiness. And it's still beautiful, but just feels a little bit like you're letting go of something and learning how to let that go well. Yeah.
Right. I think sometimes we forget that there aren't only just physical seasons of the year, but we go through spiritual seasons as well. Those kind of seasons of, like you said, the leaves kind of falling off the tree and then ending in or starting in that winter season where it does feel a little barren and a little cold, but then there's the hope of that spring season and that summer season coming. And you talked a little bit about that in your Upcycled Minute, just longing for that spring and summer season. And I love the idea of equating our spiritual life to the season of the year and just knowing that we're going to experience all of those seasons. You also talked a little bit about Romans 5:3-5 as a verse that kind of helped you walk through that time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep.
Maybe what you learned from that verse and just how you applied it to your life?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Romans 5, that portion, like that 3-5, 3-8, talks about how God takes one thing and keeps, I love the phrase upcycling into something new, kindness into patience, patience into perseverance into hope and character. And you just get this picture of God taking these things and slowly just a little bit keep, recycling them into something new, upcycling them. And so similar to the leaves on the trees, I'm kind of a maybe like book nerd, nature nerd a little bit. When I felt like that metaphor of trees was important to me, I looked into it a little bit more. And what's interesting is the leaves will fall from this tree and they'll be on the ground, and then they'll be covered with snow, or if you don't have a snowy state like we do here in Minnesota, they still fall to the ground, they decay, right? But by spring, that becomes like mulch and it starts feeding the ground. And so literally the thing that has fallen and gone becomes what needs to feed and nourish the trees to produce new growth. And so I think of that Romans verse the same way, that there might be something like the loss of grandpa that's really hard, but I believe that God wants to meet us in everything that we're going through. He doesn't just want to meet us in our spring or in our summer. He's there for us in that fall. And so I believe that this verse spoke so powerfully to me that there is something in this loss, even that you'll be able to use again, that when spring does come around and you experience new life, it will be richer. It will be more fed well because of how I'm holding you here, how I'm nourishing you here. And we're going to take that, Amanda, and upcycle it into something new, you know, or even the like ache of waiting. That's been a big part of my story. Waiting for multiple adoptions, waiting for a lot of things. When you're in that season of waiting, how does that rest get upcycled into new energy when you're going to need it? How does that that waiting get turned into perseverance? And what do you learn from perseverance? I think we live in a world that's so fast, you know, it's so fast paced and wants us to get things done. And so, you know, there is something to be said for going slow enough to learn, you know, we don't have to look out very far outside our doors at all. And I think I love that this ties into the message of upcycling. Just, you know, we don't always have to go buy something shiny and new to make things better. We don't always have to collect and get something brand new. I can look around my house and see a throw pillow that just needs to be put in a different spot or something, right? But also too, like in our spiritual lives, what is it now that God has that he's going to be renewing into something in the future, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. And I love what you said about when you use the metaphor of the leaves kind of falling to the ground and decaying and becoming what creates that new life. And I think so often in our own spiritual journeys, we sometimes forget that that pain and those difficulties and those trials sometimes that we walk through, or even just like you said, the season of waiting, or even if it's just the fall season where things just feel like they're starting to die a little bit, that is exactly what grows us and shapes us and makes us ready for that spring season of new growth. So many things are developed in that season as we prepare for the spring season. I love that. I love that metaphor. Well, God often uses our difficult situations, kind of like we're talking about, and he upcycles our story into something beautiful. You talked a little bit about that, but can you talk a little bit about how personally he's upcycled your story?
Sure, absolutely. I think I would speak more about that waiting. So it took about 4 years to adopt our children. And I keep bringing up this adoption season. It was so unexpected. I never expected to be an adoptive mom. So if I even step back a little bit further, when I grew up, when I was young, I was in a house that was really abusive. And so I remember at the time hearing God specifically through journaling saying to me, like, I will reuse this, you know, like I will bring life out of this. And just being this little 8, 9, 10-year-old girl and wondering, how is this even possible? Like, how can this bad thing that I'm a part of be something good? And so fast forward, now I'm, you know, 30, and I know that as I've met my children and their stories, I feel like God has definitely like taken that thing that was so painful and upcycled it into like this deep place where I can meet my children in a way that I don't think I otherwise would have been able to. But also like in ministry, as I, you know, pastor at my church or things like that, there are people who have a lot of hurt in their stories. And sometimes it can be just the simple, the joy that comes in meeting somebody who feels familiar, you know, who feels as though they have done something, can completely change their heart. You know, you listen to somebody's story and it brings new light to it. Like, well, wow, I can see how God produced hope in your story. And now that is starting to generate hope in my own story. And so I think for me, it's been through a lot of painful things and through a lot of waiting, God just renewing this idea of hope. Like, even here, there is something for you. Even here, I'm producing life. And it might not look like everything else, you know, but it is still life. And I'll go back to like the tree metaphor and the gardening metaphor. You know, I'm always using gardening metaphors. You think about like tulips. And so right now, if you were to look outside our window, there's snow everywhere and it's April. And what's interesting is I know that the tulips are going to come up soon, and there's this color just waiting underground, you know, and I think life doesn't always look like what's visible on the outside. And so God is using our story to create things on the inside that will, I'm probably in a long way answering your question, but using those things like color will burst through, it will. But in the meantime, through that waiting, God has been teaching me like there's so much life happening in his constancy and in his goodness while you wait and while you stand. And you can offer that to other people too.
Absolutely. And I think there is something so powerful about sharing our story and the things that God is upcycling in our lives, because there is something really powerful, even if it's not the exact same situation, being able to chat with somebody and say, me too. I have felt that way. I've experienced that fall or winter season, and I appreciate you sharing that there is that
Mm-hmm.
hope of the spring and renewal. And I also love what you said about our situation isn't always visible. There is so much happening under the surface that we don't see in our spiritual lives, that God is just growing and working out in us. And just the metaphor again of the tulips is beautiful, knowing that underneath of that blanket of snow, the bulbs are starting to kind of grow and sprout. And soon, you know, you have that hope that something beautiful is going to come from that barrenness.
Right.
I love that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, if somebody listening today was kind of experiencing that same fall and winter season, that time of just feeling maybe even a little hopeless, or you know, just like they need the hope of something new, what is some practical advice that you might be able to give them?
Sure. That's a really good question. I think the first thing, like a word that just came to mind as I sat with that question, thinking about it, is to remember that the silent or the barren times aren't empty. You know, again, back to that tulip metaphor, just because there is silent or just because something feels empty, it doesn't mean that it is. And in fact, God is with you in everything that you do. That might sound cliche, but it has always been so good for me in the middle of it all to just be willing to slow down for a minute and take a deep breath and remember, like, I am constantly in the presence of a God who loves me, and that doesn't solve things. That might not answer the questions. It might not get me any closer to the answer that I want, or an answer at all. But just remember, you are always, always, always held. You're always loved. So just that encouragement. And I think too, God has given us good times as well, you know. So if you're in the middle of something hard, for me, it can be really helpful to reflect back on, like, what has God upcycled before? Where has there been times where God has been given me joy or taught me something in the past, that it would just be so helpful to, like, minister to my own heart right now, to remember, like, oh, and then this was good, and I remember that, and that's going to sustain me a little bit right now, or whatever that is, you know, just to revisit the things, again, that cyclical nature, like, what was a season past that can give me hope for the spring to come.
I love that. And it kind of like when you talked about your family history, your past, and God using that now, I am sure that even just thinking on that, you know, like, that's something big in your life that God has upcycled and turned into something beautiful. And
Right.
you're a mama of 7 now. And so that's something really beautiful, that God has taken something really, that really barren time, and brought new life in your new family, and has equipped you through that trial. I love that. Well, let me ask you this question. Do you have any resources for a woman listening today in that season? You gave great practical advice, but do you have any resources that you might direct people to kind of help them walk through that time?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You know, the first one is going to seem really silly, maybe. It's as simple as walking out your front door. I think God has given us a world on display of, like, peace and beauty and upcycling. I mean, the trees are like, they are, right? Like, just like this beautiful reminder that things go in cycles, and there's always something new to be had. So for me, it's always really good just to, and it's free, and you don't have to buy anything. You step outside and just kind of spend a little bit of time with what God has put before you. But I would also recommend, you know, investing in a journal. I think it's so important to keep track. It can be easy in the middle of hard seasons to remember how God is renewing things. And it can look slow. You know, I think if you're going through an upcycling process that feels kind of like dry or weary, noting even a little bit today, like, I was able actually to smile differently than I was, or there was laughter when, or I felt a little bit more peace. And maybe just helping you see the visible signs that don't always feel visible on the outside. And I would just say too, this, you know, I love writing about this kind of thing on Instagram. I prefer to think of Instagram as like a little micro blog. And a lot of times I'll take pictures of my own, like, outside elements, whether it's our cows or our, you know, our children or the orchard, and just a little reflection on, hey, God is here. This moment is big because God is in it. So I would love to encourage you in that way. If you want to stop by my blog as well, I take a lot of these similar garden and tree and vegetable and animal metaphors, just to remind us that God is renewing things a lot of times, and there is something more for you here. And that's why I'm so thankful for the upcycle message, because that is what it is. God is renewing all things all the time.
I love that. And I think, like I love that you gave some free resources to people that are easy and accessible, like just stepping out into nature. My little guy and I will be driving, and he has gotten to where he just repeats because he knows that I will say this. I will always be like, Gavin, look at that sunset. What is God? And he's always like, God is an artist. You know, and we just constantly talk about, it's so easy to be out in nature and just disconnect for a moment and look and see just the power and the presence of God, and let that be part of our renewal. Sometimes it's something just that easy, of just letting that be a part of our renewal. And journaling is such an amazing resource. It's something that I know that it's powerful. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and for sharing part of your journey with us, and for just being an encouragement to our viewers. Amanda, I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. It was a blast. I'm so honored, really. Thank you.
I just loved having Amanda Whiting today as a guest on TUL Uncut. I love the metaphor that she shared about fall into winter into spring, and just the hope of that renewal, and the way that God can upcycle our difficulties and our pain and our issues into something beautiful, like he did in her story of coming from a difficult past and being an adopted mama, and that season of waiting into now a season of motherhood. And I just loved hearing the wonderful way that she equates the seasons in nature and sees God in that, and in that time of renewal. There's so many wonderful applications that we can take from Amanda's words today. If you need some scripture reference, her verses today from Romans 3, verses 3 through 8 were so powerful. Those are definitely ones that you're going to want to read and just let marinate the beauty and the power that's found in those. Thank you so much for joining us today at TUL Uncut, where we know that even the most broken things can be upcycled in the right hand.